All right, we're going to go ahead and get started because I know how busy all of your schedules are. My name is Shirley Bloomfield. I head up NTCA, the Rural Broadband Association, and we're really delighted to have you here with us today as we talk about educational broadband for K through 12 and beyond. One of the initiatives NTCA has kicked off a few years ago is something that we call the Smart Rural Community Initiative, and it's the idea that broadband and networks really become kind of the brains of a community. But then you think about, how do you use those applications? How do you tie that brain into the different services that communities can really utilize? Obviously, we look at things like education as being very key when you think about how the world opens up to students, regardless of what level of education they're at, because of their access to technology. It really changes the paradigm. And so one of the things we want to do with you here today is we're going to talk a little bit about what it really means to kind of tie technology in together. We've got Senator Begich from Alaska, who will be joining us as soon as that vote you just heard completes and he's able to come on down. And he'll be talking a little bit about his role on the Senate Commerce Committee and, you know, the advent of broadband and really what it means and how it plays into educational efforts. And then we are really excited and appreciate greatly Discovery Education putting together this demonstration that we're going to be having long distance from Alaska, talking about how technology is actually used in the classroom and what it means. And you know, here in Washington, we're hearing so much about E-rate reform, Connect Ed, a lot of the administration's initiatives that really focus in on broadband and how do we get access to schools? How do we get capacity to schools? There's certainly a lot of different challenges here on the federal front, so there's a lot of people who will be really excited about engaging. And we're hoping that this will become an engagement because after the demonstration, we're going to have an interactive discussion, and I am really delighted that we're going to have the National Education Association, the American Library Association, and the American Association of Community Colleges engage with us talking about the different ways they're seeing technology used, how the dots kind of get connected, and maybe engage with all of us here in the room about, you know, where do we need to take this and what kind of things are you seeing in your communities or in the districts that you're working in, and where might we think about going in terms of a policy perspective. So I am trying to drag this on just long enough that Senator Begich can get here, and we won't have to interrupt this demonstration because these folks have been terrific. It is, we all have to remember it is 4 hours earlier, so we kudos to all of you for getting in there so bright and early this morning to do this demonstration. Just out of curiosity, you know, one of the things that, you know, we hear a lot about is getting a gig to every school, a gig to every student. I'm looking at all of you, and you've been in school a lot more recently than I have, but how many of you actually had things like iPad in the classroom or had access to internet or broadband when you were, you know, in school, mostly undergrad, you know, not undergraduate, but, you know, primary school? Any folks who actually kind of were in schools that were wired and you had technology and you had technology labs? Yeah, you guys are a lot younger than I am. But, you know, it's hard to imagine now, you know, schools without access to this kind of opportunity for students. So with that, we can make a decision about where we go from here. So are your folks okay if we go ahead and get started and then kind of see if the senators game to stick around for a minute? The nice thing would be we've got the synergy of the demonstrations up in Alaska, and we have the Alaska senator, so I think it could be a very nice tie-in for him to actually see the demonstration as well. So we'll go ahead and I'll turn it to you to go ahead and do the introduction.
Shirley, thank you so very much. Well, good morning and welcome. Thank you so much for being here today. My name is Suzanne Thompson, and I serve as our Vice President for Western Educational Partnerships with Discovery Education. And if you're not sure what we do at Discovery, we really have the pleasure and the honor of partnering globally to ensure that students and teachers are harnessing the power of digital content and high-quality professional development, specifically designed to increase student achievement and student engagement. We really want to build capacity for our teachers to ensure that they are creating learning experiences that are digitally relevant and designed to ensure our students are embracing the world around them. So it's truly an honor to be here. Shirley, an enormous thanks to you and to NTCA for this opportunity. And most importantly, I'd like to introduce Dr. Steve Atwater. Steve is the superintendent of the Kenai Peninsula Borough School District in Soldotna, Alaska. And on behalf of Discovery Education, it's not only a complete honor to introduce Steve, it's really an honor to know him and have the chance to partner and collaborate with he and his colleagues at Kenai. A longtime Alaskan educator serving the children and communities of Alaska for over 33 years, including some very remote locations and our Native Alaskan population, Steve really recognizes the power of digital content and high-quality professional development to ensure that his educators are able to differentiate instruction and meet the unique learning style needs of their students in Kenai. I would say that Dr. Atwater is incredibly inspired by the ability of technology and broadband to bring relevant and rigorous content to the learning experiences for students, which is particularly important in some of the very rural locations of Alaska. So won't you please join me in welcoming Dr. Atwater and Mr. Jason Daniels, a fourth grade teacher at Kenai. Welcome, Dr. Atwater and Jason.
Senator Begich, Ms. Bloomfield, members of the audience, good morning. It's just after 7 in the morning here, so good to see you. My name is Steve Atwater, and I'm the superintendent of the Kenai Peninsula Borough School District. Next to me is Jason Daniels, a fourth grade teacher at one of our elementary schools. I'll give you a quick overview of our school district and then touch on some of the connectivity challenges that we face. I want to thank Senator Begich for inviting us to provide comment this morning. Our school district is located in south-central part of Alaska, just south of Anchorage. Our enrollment, close to 9,000 students, is housed at 43 schools that range in size from a traditional high school of 500 to a one-room school of 12 students. To give you a sense of the geographical size of our district, it takes 3.5 hours to drive between our two most distant schools that are accessible by road. But 4 of our schools are only accessible by air or by water. 45% of our students qualify for free or reduced price lunch. The connectivity at our schools ranges from a very good 300 megabits to a very poor 2 megabits. So in many ways, our district is a microcosm of the tension of the haves and the have-nots that exists in our state. Students at schools with poor connectivity are of course at a distinct disadvantage when compared to those students at schools with a robust connection. Finally, I'm pleased to note that our students perform well above state averages on standardized tests. For the past several years, we've been working hard to expand our instruction to include digital content. As you know, our teachers are far more dependent on this medium than they were in the past. Our use of smartboards, laptops, and in some cases smartphones during lessons now makes the use of online digital content a fluid part of our learning environment. Those schools with poor connectivity, however, are limited in what they can do in this area. We do cache content, such as Discovery Education, at our most remote sites, but still struggle to make this work. Of note with this conversation is that because of the small size of our schools, we offer distance learning opportunities for many of our secondary students and have 7.5 staff members dedicated to making this happen. At any given time across our district, we have high school students working remotely with these teachers. The bottom line is that online digital content is causing education to quickly change. Because of this, I'm convinced that our students will be at a distinct disadvantage without the ability to seamlessly access the internet. It is for this reason that we must explore ways to have a robust internet connection at all of our schools. Thank you for holding this event, and thank you for doing what you can to level the digital playing field for my students and for students across the country. I now want to introduce Jason Daniels, who teaches 4th grade at Begich Elementary School. Jason is a national board certified teacher with a master's degree in educational technology. He was recognized as a BP Teacher of the Year and spent a year in Australia on a teacher exchange. Finally, I'm proud to note that Jason is a graduate of our school district. He will now share an abbreviated lesson that utilizes digital content from Discovery Education.
Thank you, Dr. Atwater, Senator Begich, and guests. It's an honor to be here today to talk about two topics that I'm passionate about. That's teaching and technology. I hope you're all ready for a 4th grade lesson. So here we go. My objective today is to demonstrate technology in the rural classroom. Today's students need to be innovators and thinkers and problem solvers to compete and be competitive in the workforce. To make this happen, teachers must be equipped with 21st century technology tools to give our students current real-world problems to solve and to prepare our students for challenges and opportunities that lie ahead for them. With this in mind, and in the wake of one of the nation's largest active wildfires in our backyard, my colleagues and I developed a unit about the effect of fires on the local forest ecosystem. It's also a topic I know something about since I was a wildland firefighter for a number of years. I'm going to highlight the introductory lesson right here. It's the lesson's about focusing on the effects of fire on our environment and our community. I rely heavily on discovery education for digital resources that I use in the classroom. I'm also going to showcase another digital resource from the web, as well as mention a classroom-based technology that I use. The Kenai Peninsula Borough School District adopted the Next Generation Science Standards. These standards were finalized in 2013, and this lesson and unit addresses life science standards at the 4th grade level. So we start with an essential question. This will help focus my students' attention on the topic and give me an idea of what they already know. They get time to discuss the question with a shoulder partner and formulate a hypothesis, give them an idea what they think about the positive and negative effects of fire. I purposely don't use the word forest yet. I don't want to limit their thinking. And it engages every student in discussion. I then provide an opportunity for students to share their answers with the whole class. Next, students are going to get more information about fire from a discovery education video. First, I ask students to read the 2 facts and a fiction statements below and predict which ones are facts and which one is fiction. They'll use whiteboards for their responses or a student response system. Through experience, I know that turning learning into a game like this one tends to increase the level of engagement in the students. It really works. Games really work for learning. I even have a game to clean the classroom at the end of the day. The kids are actually excited to play it. It's called Magic Piece of Garbage. So games really can help the learning process. Then the students watch the video. So we're going to watch a piece of the video. I hope you all have your guesses ready of which one of these statements are facts and which are fiction. Here we go.
When large sections of any forest are burned, it can result in enormous devastation to both the plant and animal life within it, and damage to precious watershed as well.
So I'll stop the video there. You get the idea. And after the video, though, I give them an opportunity to revise their answer, and then they can share those answers with the class. Finally, I reveal the correct responses at the end. You've probably picked up from the video that fires do damage watersheds. So that's how the game is played. And they love it. They beg for more videos so they can try this again. They really enjoy that activity. This fact or fiction activity is a discovery education structure that's taught in their professional development workshops. Now to make it more relevant to their lives, let's get real. Here we have a map of the Kenai Peninsula, and the Kenai Peninsula is about the size of West Virginia or Belgium. So I'm going to click an external link here. It's going to take us to a fire map, and this is a map that fire personnel actually use to help them fight the fire. So and it's open to the public, so we can use it in education as well. It's been a really neat resource. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. And it's time to let the students share their experiences about the Funny River fire that we had locally. At its height, the fire was the largest active fire in the nation at over 200,000 acres. And it started about 6 miles from the school, so you can imagine that was the topic of conversation around the school for quite some time. Using near real-time imaging, we gain instant access to fire information. We use tools like Discovery Education, ArcGIS, and NASA satellite imagery to provide our students with the kind of cutting-edge technology to make their learning come alive. I want to emphasize that one of the main advantages of these technologies is how quickly and easily teachers can develop high-quality content for teaching and learning. Now, most of my students will have a story that they want to share about the fire. I'll have the fire map showing like this on the interactive whiteboard, and I'll invite students to come up and zoom around and move around in it and get to know how the map works. I'm also going to show them on the left here that there are layers of information in the map. So we will click on a layer that gives us the fire boundary. As you can see, that's the boundary of the fire, and this has been, at the height of the fire, it was updated about every 12 hours. So each of these little, I'll zoom in a little more, each of these little sections that you see here is one day's growth in the fire. So we can literally see the fire growing, the kids can, during this unit. And they can zoom in further and actually see their home, their school, and of course their community and how close that fire actually got to it. Now when they see this map of the fire and they see how close it is to their home and community, even the reluctant learners want to come out from behind their desk to share. While the students are using the interactive map, I'll ask them questions like, what are the positive and negative effects of this fire? What do you suppose the forest looked like before the fire and after the fire? What will the burned area look like next year, 50 years, 300 years from now? Viewing this map sets the stage for tomorrow's lesson on what is forest succession. There are social studies and math tie-ins here as well. Now, how did the students showcase their learning? Discovery education boards are like a one-slide PowerPoint with interactive features. On a daily basis or at the end of each lesson, the students are given time to stop, reflect, and process their thinking and learning by adding to their own Discovery Education board. It's one of their favorite times of the day. It's here that they will literally construct and showcase their understanding of the material, and as a teacher, I can monitor their understanding and I can use it as a form of assessment of their learning during the unit and after. Let's take a look at and see how a board is actually made. I'm going to click another external link. It'll take me to Discovery Education. The top boxes you see are templates for a new board for a quick startup. The boxes below are boards that I've already made. Let's look at this template here. It's going to ask me to give it a title. And we'll just give it a quick title, Forest Succession. Click Continue, and it'll ask me to save it in one of my Discovery Education content folders. So we'll just put it in an Ecosystems folder. I will add it to the folder, and in a matter of seconds, I have myself my own board that I can use, and it's already built for me, and I can just change a few things. I can add text. It gives me boxes for text. It gives me boxes for multimedia as well. And in these boxes, I can search Discovery Education for multimedia. I can search my content folders for multimedia to add, and I can even upload other resources from the web. And if I scroll down, you can see the size of it. I can increase and decrease the size as needed. One of my favorite features, though, is this quick list at the bottom. I hope you can see that. It's kind of like my bookmark of my favorite content on Discovery Education. I can literally click and drag and drop my favorite content onto the boards. I will drag a couple of resources here that I found. And let's actually go into this resource here. This is an interactive, hands-on application that I found on Discovery Edge related to the topic. So it says drag and drop the functions to the plant parts that perform them. It says absorbs water. I will drag this over to the plant part. Let's see if this is correct. No, it's incorrect. So it'll tell me that. How about down here at the roots? Cool. It gives me an animation to show me that I'm correct. So that's just an example of some of the interactive features that are available to the students. Now let's take a look at a student board that one of my former students created. And this is Owen, and he made one on this unit we're talking about today. He's got his text boxes with notes from each lesson. He put in his own photos, then captioned them about the fire, and he even found his own Discovery Education video related to the topic and inserted that. And he even surfed the web and found a resource, a photo from the firefighter's website that he wanted to include as well. And he has his field trip journal down at the bottom. I asked Owen what he thought of making the board, and this is what he said. I like Discovery Education Board Builder because it was fun and easy to use. The builder was fun because I was able to create the background and the foreground of the board using different prints and colors. I made it my own. It was easy because all I had to do was click the media button to insert pictures and videos from Discovery Ed or my desktop. It only took me a few minutes to figure the tools, and I spent about 10 minutes on each entry. Super easy for kids. I think teachers will be able to use the board builder in the classroom to help kids remember what they were taught in a lesson. I learn better when I have a chance to talk and write down what I hear. It just sticks better in my head. Sounds like a budding teacher. Well, my goal here when the boards are finished is to share these Discovery Education boards with my cultural exchange school in Wodonga, Victoria, Australia. We will use Skype and the share screen feature to share our projects. Again, these online resources that I have described today would not be realistic without broadband connection. In closing, broadband technology enhances understanding. It brings the outside world in and provides a platform to enrich and extend teaching and learning. Thank you for your time today and your interest in our students' digital learning experiences.
Okay, here.
They muted the mic.
Well, I guess we've got the opportunity to ask some questions. So I am sure you guys both are, I'm still stuck on the magic piece of garbage game, but we're going to try that at my house. But love to see if anybody's got any questions you'd like to ask. Don't let them off the hook. It's only, I saw the big cup of coffee, so you're ready for questions. Well, let me ask you something. So you get this content from Discovery Education, but one of the things, Steve, that you mentioned is that you've got schools with varying capacity in terms of broadband. And since we represent 900 small rural broadband providers, many of whom are in the state of Alaska, how do you then have to differ the education that you're doing? So it seems like some schools are getting certain lessons and certain lesson plans, and other schools are kind of left out of it. Is that a little bit of what you're seeing?
Very much so. What you saw from Jason was a school with a very good connectivity. Our more remote schools, those accessible by water or air, don't have anywhere close to that level of connectivity and probably couldn't pull that lesson off. As I mentioned in my introduction, we do cache content from Discovery Ed at night, but have found that it's really not the same and doesn't work quite as well. And so the challenge for us is that the lack of connectivity at our more remote schools sort of limits or prohibits those kind of lessons from really having the effect that they did. And obviously this is a really impactful lesson that went very well.
All right, thank you. Yes, okay, we've got a question, a couple of them.
I'm so sorry to make you do that, but just so they can hear from the microphone. I would drag it, sorry. Thank you. That's okay. Hi, I'm just curious about your kids taking devices home. If you have connectivity at home, if that's an issue, you know, when you talk about having the full spectrum of haves and have-nots, how are you coping with that, kids being able to do homework at home that relies on technology?
Yeah, it's a great question because we have a bit of everything for our homes. A lot of our homes do have good connectivity, but also we have a segment of our population with homes that have nothing but dial-up, and even because of poverty probably don't have dial-up. And so we have a mishmash, and as a result, we're really not able to have that fluid learning environment at home as well as in the school. We can't expect kids to do online learning at home because they simply don't have access to it. Some certainly do, but others don't. With regard to taking digital devices home, we have some of that going on, but because of the lack of connectivity, it's really not reached that point where we're doing it with all of our students. And Jason, I don't know if you have anything.
Well, yeah, I'd just reiterate that my family, the families of my students, they just don't, I can't count on all of them having connectivity, so it's very difficult for me to plan for them to work from home. Most of what we do has to be done at school, and even those with no connectivity or little at home, I oftentimes offer them more time in school to complete those assignments as needed.
We have another question here.
Begich, go ahead.
Hi, thanks for doing this. Can you talk a little bit about the interplay for your school on some of the rural build-out USF money, but then also being a school, some of the schools and library funds as well?
So did you hear that question about whether or not your schools are using the E-rate program, and which is the Universal Service Fund for schools and libraries?
Certainly. Certainly we do, and we benefit greatly from the USF funds. That's a significant part of what we do. One of the concerns is that the schools in my district will be averaged in terms of level of poverty for the subsidy, and that would be for us a big disadvantage, so I hope that never happens. There is a move I've heard to average the schools, so you do have a one number for your poverty level to determine your subsidy level. So, but certainly we do take great advantage of that, and would encourage those policymakers to think in terms of identifying individual schools and their needs rather than a collective group for the district.
Okay, so what we're going to do now, I think, is we're going to go ahead, and you all are going to be part of this discussion, but I'd love to go ahead and introduce our panelists. Jessica, I'll turn it to you to introduce folks, and then we'll have everybody get a few words to say, and then hopefully a discussion going.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Shirley, and thank you all for being here today. This is such a great turnout for such an important issue. So we have three panelists today, and I'd like to have our three panelists come up if you would. We had them dispersed throughout the audience so they could blend in. Fantastic. So today we have with us three great organizations that work in the realm of education. We have Corey Williams from the National Education Association, Marika Visser from the American Library Association, and Lori Qualls with the American Association of Community Colleges. So thank you all so much for being here today. And I'll stand up here. I think Shirley's got some great questions, and then we'll move into questions from the audience. And please feel free to jump in, guys, if you feel like you have something to add to the conversation as well.
I'm assuming you each would have a couple minutes that you'd like to kind of tee up exactly kind of your organizations and how you're seeing broadband and why technology is a really important part of where you're going. So love to, Corey, we'll go ahead and
Great.
go on down. Thank you.
Good morning. Is that good? My name is Corey Williams. I'm a federal lobbyist with the National Education Association, the NEA. Oh,
It's technology.
there we go. That's better. I'll start again. I'm Corey Williams. I'm a federal lobbyist with the National Education Association. The NEA represents more than 3 million educators across the country from the entire spectrum of education, from K-12 through higher education, including faculty at colleges, universities, and community colleges. The NEA's mission is to ensure all children have equitable access to a great public education. And we consider ourselves champions of equity, and that drives all of our policy decisions, including in this space, broadband and education, and in particular rural education. The key component there is equity. And the E-rate program has already been mentioned, so I'll just spend a moment saying that the NEA has championed the E-rate program before it was even incepted or implemented in the 1996 Telecom Act. We were there at the beginning. And we have shepherded and protected and championed the E-rate program for the past, since the program's inception, through the past 18 years. It's been an incredibly successful program connecting nearly all schools and public libraries. And the NEA believes that our energy is best spent continuing to work on promoting the E-rate program and working through some of these potential modifications or modernizations that are being considered by the FCC right now to ensure that equity remains the cornerstone of the program because of its impact, in particular on rural areas. And Superintendent Atwater has already made reference, so I'd be happy to come back around and talk more about some of his concerns with regard to the E-rate program.
Thank you.
And I'm Marika Visser with the American Library Association, and we're a member organization. We have about 58,000 members across the country. We serve all kinds of libraries, so in this conversation, we usually talk about public libraries. We also have school libraries and college and academic libraries, and then a whole host of special libraries, military libraries, and things like that. And for this conversation, there are about 16,000 public library buildings across the country. About 77% of those are considered small and rural libraries. So the bulk of our libraries are actually in very small and often remote communities. And I am in the Washington office, and my role is primarily to focus on telecommunications and broadband access and the role of public libraries in supporting broadband adoption and digital inclusion.
Good morning. Hi, I'm Lori Quarles. I'm with the American Association of Community Colleges. We represent the nation's largely public community colleges, although we also include tribal colleges and technical colleges. Under that banner, there are roughly 1,200 community colleges with over 13 million adults and some youngsters enrolling annually. Of those, about 8 million of them are what we would consider to be credit students. And so the others, the 5 million or so, are in non-credit courses. It could be an adult who's simply taking a foreign language or perhaps learning a new skill but isn't actually working towards a degree or a certificate. Community colleges pride themselves in being in every congressional district. They are in every part of the country. So whether you're in rural, urban, or suburban, there are community colleges. And our rural community colleges represent almost half of the colleges, not half of the enrollments, but nearly half of the colleges. So many of them are very small. They may be one of the largest institutions in their rural community. So they serve not only for providing education, but also job training and cultural opportunities. They may have a library, a museum, music programs, summer camps. I mean, they are critical in these rural communities. And because of that, we are one of what we would call anchor institutions, along with K-12, libraries, public safety institutions, hospitals that provide critical services in rural America. And probably the only real difference between us and K-12, or for that matter, the more elite institutions, is that community colleges have embraced job training as one of our central components. So what that means is not only are we offering degrees and certificates in academic fields, but we're also doing very defined technical education programs for workforce training. And that includes those individuals who are 16 or 17 years old, all the way up to people who are in their 60s. And certainly during the economic downturn we all experienced recently, we saw a huge wave of people coming back who are either unemployed or underemployed. And that unfortunately didn't spare rural America, which has always had higher unemployment rates than our urban areas. So we've seen huge enrollments coming back to our colleges over the last few years. In fact, we had double-digit enrollment increases over a period of about 3 years there, without concomitant increases in federal or state funding, I might add. So it really was a challenge to try to accommodate all these people. And that's where distance education has really enabled us to increase enrollments at a time when we don't have enough classroom space to accommodate all of these people who want education and job training. Many of them want to continue at our programs to go to school in the evening or on weekends because they have other responsibilities. They have a day job, they have a family to raise, they have transportation challenges. So distance education has really been such a fundamental, critical service for our institutions. And as the earlier panel discussed, there is a huge variance in terms of the quality of services that are available in some parts of our rural America. Some of our colleges are tribal colleges. Many of them lack running water and electricity, so they certainly lacked good broadband access. But they are trying to provide the type of programs that their communities need for not only education but job training. And they're relying heavily on the most rudimentary distance education, with many of the students coming and doing their homework or their extended training at public computing centers. Some of those centers rely on the libraries, some of them rely on K-12, many of them rely on the community colleges. So the students will do their coursework not just at home, but they'll actually stay at a public computing center. And I spoke with one of our tribal colleges in Alaska, and that was one of the issues that they raised, that they actually have public computing centers in various remote locations so that individuals can apply for a job, can do homework, can continue with their education at that public computing center. So I think
We're
you
going
wanna
to do a
break-
little
Sure.
transition. So not that Senator Begich wouldn't really benefit from hearing all of this discussion, which he may still be able to partake in. But I think it's a good time to also introduce Senator Begich from Alaska, who has been a big champion of using broadband and technology in the education field, and certainly has been a champion on the committee. And he's very excited to see his constituents back up there on the screen. So Senator Begich, we'd love to turn the podium to you to share kind of your thoughts about how important this all is.
Great,
Thank you.
very much. Thanks, Shirley. It is good to see folks from, I think they're from Kenai, right? Yeah. I don't know if they can see me. I'm going to wave. I'm going to do the virtual handshake. There we go. You know, I do that with students all the time, and I hate to say this, but some of the adults aren't real clear what I'm up to when I say, come up and pose with me, and kids get up right away, and they get right around the screen, or when I do the virtual handshake, they look at me like, what is he doing? But more and more understanding it. Again, thank you, Shirley, for the invitation. I didn't mean to interrupt the panel. We're in between a series of votes, and I'll have to go right after this back upstairs. We got a couple more votes in front of us. First, thank you to the folks that are here, and again to the panel. The Smart Rural Community Initiative is not just a mantra, it is a way of thinking and a fully understand and fully embrace what we need to be doing, especially in rural communities. If we look at what's driving our rural communities on a day-to-day basis, and you can see it right here, and see that there is real demand for more connectivity, more broadband, more apps, and certainly more options for how we get information. I will digress for a second. I was in New York recently, and I got to tell you, even the big cities need it. I won't tell you what network I was on, but I'm just going to tell you, I couldn't get anybody, and I was driving me crazy. Someone next to me had a different network, and they were like, so there's a lot of work to be done. But I'm not saying anything. No, it wasn't. Rural community leaders really, when you think about it, who work together to meet these demands, will find their villages, towns, and cities are more sustainable and responsive to today's rural landscape, and also the most innovation comes out of rural America. This is because leaders who invest in making their communities connected in a smart, forward-thinking manner can plan ahead and offer stability paired with innovation. That means preparing for what's to come instead of responding to what's occurring. This is especially true in a rapidly changing sector. While a smart rural community in Alaska might not exactly match up side by side in comparison to a smart rural community in Kansas or Indiana or anywhere else, there are models that will effectively work across varying landscapes no matter where they are. I think in many ways, in a large part of what Smart Rural Community Program is all about, encouraging communities to develop and showcase models and foster innovation and collaboration. In effect, making rural America a place that people want to live in, raise their family, and retire in. Broadband-enabled applications are widely varied, depending on the location and the local communities. For example, in the Midwest, SMART might technology to allow farmers to increase their productivity in their crops. In Alaska, broadband application might be better suited to help scientists track salmon migration patterns, to help fishermen and wildlife managers make sustainable fisheries decisions. And I can tell you an exact example of this yesterday. I was on the phone with a fisherman on his cell phone in the Prince William Sound fishing, and he was rushing back to shore because the weather patterns have changed to 50+ mile-an-hour winds and pretty severe weather. While I was struggling to make calls to other parts of the country, I could call him, and he directly called me back from a boat in the ocean. I mean, unbelievable when you think about it. You talk about rural, that's as rural as you get. And he was describing what he's doing and getting prepared for the weather conditions and all the issues around fisheries. So you can see how smart can work and where it can be advantageous. Different end goals and some overarching purposes to develop and utilize a smart model, maximize food production in a sustainable way, both fisheries and, as I mentioned, in the farming community. As a member of the Senate Commerce Committee, these are two areas that I'm passionate about when it comes to rural. Shirley knows this. I bother her more than she likes probably, but she also finds me everywhere I go because it's always a struggle when we're dealing with telecom policy. People want a one-size-fits-all. Then magic will occur if we just have one policy, one line, one rule. The reality is in rural Alaska or rural parts of this country, that's not going to be the case. It just will not happen. And the telecom industry for Alaska is very important. It's about jobs, it's about e-commerce, it's about money saved through telemedicine, which is a huge part of our delivery system within rural Alaska. And preparing the next generation, as you're probably hearing here, on distance education. You know, I give an example and saw someone down in Kodiak, and it was a teacher, I think it was from Nebraska, and was describing that he was kind of burnt out on education. He went to Kodiak just to have a new experience, but as he was sitting there with the new technology, he had 3 different students. Kodiak's a pretty big island, pretty significant in size. So the school district borough is pretty large, like the Kenai borough these guys cover. But in one area, he was able to touch 3 communities, 3 different grade levels all at the same time, separate them out when necessary, test them differently, do different classwork. This guy was excited to be a teacher again. Not because he just found another place to go, but because he was melding technology in an area of education that he had no idea could be done, and touching kids' lives where they may not get a full education because they don't have the connectivity that we all have in an urban area. So what he was experiencing was an unbelievable excitement for me as a policymaker to see a teacher excited about that, motivated about that. It means those kids will get excited. Or yesterday when I was at an event and this mother was trying to take a photo, actually it was a dad trying to take a photo, and he couldn't get the phone to work, and here's the 10-year-old. I said, I'll take care of that, Dad. And fixed it all up. He couldn't get the phone to focus, and he was struggling with it. She was on it like that. I mean, days have changed. And, you know, no difference in an urban area. Rural America, rural Alaska needs the same opportunities. They need to be connected. And in my state, the challenges are immense. Distance, cost, how far apart these villages are. But from our end of it, we see huge opportunities in Alaska. When you think about energy development that's occurring in the Arctic, or increased polar shipping that will create a need of technology, tourism, and challenges really balancing this new technology, the development with this unique environment in Alaska. So technology is a big piece of it, but we lack, in a lot of cases, basic infrastructure. I was talking to someone also this last week, and they said to me about social media. How does that work? How do you use it in Alaska? And they said for the younger people. I said, actually, in rural Alaska, it's not just the younger people. You can pretty much go to rural Alaska, and everyone has a cell phone, and they utilize it fully. For example, we were waiting for a plane to come in a few weeks ago, and you know the airline didn't know exactly the details, but we did because we had the system on our app in Bethel, Alaska. We could see exactly where the plane was and how timing it was, or what time it was going to land, and the weather conditions they were working through. Everybody uses this technology in rural Alaska if they can get access to it and if they have high speed capacity. And for us, this is a huge challenge of delivering service. And my view is, you know, if you can deliver telecommunications in Alaska, pretty much anywhere else in the world is going to be a piece of cake. It really is. 80% of our communities are non-accessible by road. You can't get up to them. It's plane or boat or snow machine or some other means of transportation. A lot of our service is satellite delivered. So for many reasons, you know, we have significant issues out in rural Alaska. In a recent report by TechNet comparing states' broadband index, we're 49th. Now, when you think about it, we're the 49th state too. We don't want to be 49th in that category. We want to be up there like everyone else. But it has an issue with network quality and the cost and economic structure to make it happen. And for Alaska, this is truly unacceptable. The terrestrial broadband and fiber are making their way north. They're moving through because of what's needed on the East Coast. That's what's so unique. It's not because Alaska is the market. We're going to be feeders of, I think, 8 or 9 opportunities we'll be able to peel off as this fiber moves across and around Alaska through the Arctic and then over to New York and New Jersey for telecommunications, for finance in Europe. For us, we'll be able to get right into that. Just in Alaska last year, we formed the Alaska Broadband Task Force, produced a blueprint to accelerate for our own purposes. And we got to keep in mind, Alaska, before all this existed, all these cell phones and everything else, it was teleconferencing. For those that are much younger than me, teleconferencing is a phone, you push the button, and you get people to talk on it like a speakerphone. But we launched our own satellites because we could not wait for the federal government to figure out what to do. We launched our satellites paid by Alaska in order to connect Alaska through teleconferencing. So for us, we've now established and we set out a blueprint on the Broadband Task Force to produce a blueprint to accelerate deployment, availability, adoption, and other criteria for our broadband capacity throughout. State leaders are starting to recognize what we need to do in Alaska because it is the way of life in the future. And there should be no difference between where you live, being able to connect up. And as I said, I enjoyed one trip. I had 4 cabinet secretaries come out to Alaska. And they, if you've ever been around cabinet secretaries, they have all this security and people and more people for the people and people for the other people. And so they're, oh no, we got our phones. And I loved it because the elders in the community said, yeah, that's not going to work. And they said, no, we got, sat phones and this and that. Yeah, that's nice. And of course, when they got there, guess what didn't work? All their cell phones. And we tried to tell them this. And for us, it was an awakening. For 4 cabinet secretaries, we brought them up in 2009. And the goal was that experience not planned, but experience that they enjoyed, from my end of it, that they got a real feel of what it's like to be disconnected when you are connected 100% of the time here. Right? So now you go to a place and you can't touch your phone. They're cabinet secretaries. These are fairly important people. 4 of them together. And they're now having problems. They're borrowing elders' phones because that's what's working. And sometimes it's not working so great. And I think it's an awakening of what has to be done in rural Alaska. When you think, and not to take anything away from the Kenai borough here, but I'll bring up the Northwest Arctic borough, which is way up north, Kotzebue, and serving 12 remote villages, has a population that is about 81% Alaska Native. The district has incorporated new technologies into learning with 1 student laptop distribution. And it has video conference equipment for 11 of the villages. All important because now to move from a village to Kotzebue to the hub is not an easy task. Sometimes if the weather's bad, you're not going anywhere for days, or you have to run up the river or down the river on a boat, and not a boat that's like you see out here in the Potomac. They're a little different. Open skiffs sometimes, and the weather is not very pleasant. So when you put that all together, what the Northwest Arctic Borough is doing, what the Kenai Borough is doing, all these other communities are doing is trying to use this technology to advance and give equality to individuals no matter where they live and how remote they are to get education, economic opportunity, health care, all the pieces that make our lives better today. And for us, it's a great challenge. And as I said, the Smart Rural Community Initiative is a piece of the equation. But at the end of the day, people will move. They're more mobile than ever before. And the faster we move this technology to be available to anyone, anywhere, is going to make this country even better and greater. And I just can't say enough about the work you all are doing here, your panel that you have. My friends from Kenai, and they look nervous. Look at this. They have you can tell educators, right? They're very studious. They got their paperwork. They don't budge. If this was telecom people, they'd be all over the place. We got things to do, meetings to go to, stuff to develop, apps to get done. Let me end and just say thank you. Thank you for allowing me a few minutes in between votes. And anytime Shirley calls, I'm happy to participate because this is an area that most folks don't understand unless you're from a rural community. And most legislation doesn't acknowledge rural aspects. And it is incumbent upon us to raise this issue higher and higher every day, continue to pound away. And yes, it's like a broken record. Did you hear it in the committees when the chairman says to me, oh, we're going to hear about Alaska again? Yes, you will, because I'm going to remind people what it takes to communicate. And the more we do of that, the more sensitivity members will have who are not necessarily tech savvy or are tech savvy, but see a one-size-fits-all. This is important. So the work you're doing, the staff members that are here, the folks in the industry, thank you for participating. Thanks for helping to be the advocates that honestly make my job a little bit easier because I can have people out there I can turn to, say, help me get this information, and it appears magically in a lot of ways. So thank you all very much. I'll let you get back to your conversation. Oh, I just glanced. You just made an error here. I hate to do this. I'm going to embarrass you. This is a pet peeve of mine. Whenever you see a map of the United States, I do not mean to embarrass you, but I have a wall in my office with all these, with companies I write letters to and say, hey, where's Alaska? Where's Hawaii? And they send letters back. Actually, AT&T and Verizon, all their marketing plans changed because we sent them a letter. When you see their ads now, you'll see Alaska and Hawaii, and you kind of say, oh, it's kind of odd there. But if you go back a few years ago, less than a year ago, they didn't have us on there. In all their media, and the presidents of both those companies wrote us letters apologizing and then doing their own marketing. So I'm just... I'm sorry.
I was going to say your friends from Alaska said to say hello to you.
Oh, very...
I called the colleges up there.
Oh.
And they knew you.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, he's visited our campus.
Yes, we love these campuses because they use the technology.
This is an old map.
Okay, I love it. I love it.
What?
I'm sorry I did that. My staff is going, why do you do that? You had a good presentation. What did you embarrass her for? It is, but it is important because a lot of times, again, you talk about these rural issues and, you got to remind people over and over again. I like to tell people when I have my colleagues complain about how long they fly back home, I say, I fly 10 hours one way. And then I got to get there and fly more. And by the time you're done, you're in a smaller, I'll end on one quick story, and I took a New York Times reporter up recently to Alaska. And so, big jet from here, goes up to Alaska. Then we go in a little smaller plane, not small at that point, smaller plane. And then we get to Bethel and we go, we're going to go see one of the villages. Now we're in a boat, small boat. And then we dock, and it's not on a dock. You just kind of pull up on the riverside and you get out, and then you walk through the village on their roads, which are actually boardwalks because it's too marshy and wet. And I think he got a clear experience, and the New York Times photographer was with us. She couldn't believe what we just did in order from Washington, D.C. to get on the ground in a village. By the time we got there, it was about 16, 18 hours. That's just one village. And Andrea, population 500? 500. So small village, but just as important as Anchorage 300,000 or DC. We have to think about this every time we work on issues like this. And education is one of the driving factors in getting video, teleconference, technology, video teleconferencing, high-speed broadband. They're kind of the driver with E-rate and other capacity. This is important that we never forget this. This is what's driving some of this innovation. When kids can go to their school and get connected, may not get connected at home, but they know in their educational institutions they can get connected. And what they can learn, and the door that opens in a small rural village like 500, and now you get to touch the world in education, it's an unbelievable experience for some of these kids who have never left the village. So this is an eye-opener. And so what you all are doing is powerful for these kids, and you hear about it. And they're excited. And so thank you for what you're doing. I didn't mean to embarrass you, but so if anyone has a U.S. map, hide it. Because my eyes do wander on that stuff very quickly. But thank you all very much. And thank you to the panel for allowing me to interrupt you. Thanks. Have a great day.
Thank you.
I see the maps going under the chairs right now. Senator Begich raised a lot of really, really interesting things, and I could see some of you kind of like taking notes. But, he raised the importance of awareness with policymakers. He talked about E-rate, he talked about adoption, and he talked about access. I'm assuming, I have prepared questions, but I'm assuming after listening to him, each of you probably has some reaction or something from your organization that he hit upon in his remarks that really kind of struck a chord with you. So I don't know if, a lot of things that we've talked about, how do you achieve greater deployment? You talk about the inequity, what it means for the different schools and the different systems that you're serving. How do you educate policymakers as to how you connect? Policymakers are probably very used to hearing from us about broadband, but not so much necessarily from education groups. I mean, you probably even find that you're dealing with different LAs in the same office. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. I know this is kind of impromptu and kind of cheating, but I'm just curious if that sparks anything for any of you. And it may not.
Can I answer one question on the map?
It's going to be all about the map.
So I have to tell you something about the map. I pulled out an old report that we had done about rural America, and I think this will resonate with a lot of you. Traditionally, higher education has served as a pathway out of poverty. For most of the 20th century, public and private scholarships provided opportunities for a few talented young people to attend colleges or universities outside their rural communities. This was back in 1997 that we were writing this. And so unfortunately, many of these individuals, once they left the rural community to go to college or university outside, never returned to that rural community. So for many years, we've seen an outflux of rural talent basically leaving rural America. And so one of the great things about broadband is that by having that access to the education locally, you don't have to leave the rural community. And in fact, you can have all of the benefits of an urban or international travel experience without ever leaving the comfort of your home. So one of the things that I was excited about in reading through this is they were talking back in 97 about the opportunity to break the mold and be able to bring the educational opportunities to rural America rather than having students have to leave rural America to get that education. So that's why I brought the old map and the old report. But our new map does have Alaska on it, and it does have a number of Alaska community colleges, including a tribal college up in Barrow, Alaska, that is still waiting to get to a more advanced broadband. They have satellite right now, so they don't have streaming video and some of the others, but they require that technology be used for every class by their faculty so that the faculty is learning to use that technology and is embedding some technology in all of their coursework. So that sort of hopefully addresses the map issue.
Now we know where the map is coming from. So kind of going back to Senator Begich, this is kind of goes to the if you had Senator Begich in the elevator with you, and you could kind of share, your sector's most important pressing issues in this space, what would it be? Corey, do you have
I
something?
can answer that very quickly, and I wouldn't even need 60 seconds. I would communicate to Senator Begich that the very program that he referenced, the E-rate, is absolutely critical to not only sustaining connectivity to those schools that are larger. For example, Superintendent Atwater said he has a high school of 500 students, and so probably I'm ascertaining that he probably has sufficient broadband capacity in that school, probably a pretty big pipe. But then you have the one-room, 12-student classroom. The E-rate is needed not only to help these communities with varying needs for ongoing sustainability and cost, monthly cost to keep access, but also to build out capacity. I would say to him the E-rate is a program that works. It's successful. It's been around for 18 years. We need to ensure that it's here for at least 18 more. And in order to meet the goals that have been established, that frankly, we should all be working toward, is to ensure that all of our schools, 100%, not 99%, 100% of our schools have sufficient broadband capacity that in order to make that work, we need to ensure that the E-rate continues, ensure that it receives appropriate support. The thing about the E-rate is it has been successful at connecting nearly 100% of schools and public libraries over the last 18 years, working in essentially $1998. The program has been capped. So one of the challenges in particular dealing with rural areas where costs are just greater, and I think it's pretty easy to identify why costs are greater. Our educators and the senator did a great job articulating the landscape and the different topography that we have to invest. We need to invest in terms of 21st century dollars if we want a 21st century infrastructure for our schools.
Marika, do you have anything?
Sure. And so thinking about, because we're also very engaged in the E-rate program and the proceeding that's underway at the moment, but just generally speaking about the difference that broadband can make in rural areas is something that we've been focusing on. Generally, to your point about bringing people back home and enabling people to stay in the community. So when it comes to the public library, we look at all of the different sort of education sectors. So we like to say that libraries complete education. So we work in partnership with K-12 schools and with community colleges and higher education, because especially with broadband and with technology, everyone I think knows learning doesn't stop at 3 o'clock. It's 24/7, and I know that that's a big emphasis right now, is whether people have access to technology in the classroom or at home or somewhere in between, whether if you're an adult learner, maybe at a place of work, or if not, then at the public library. So talking about making sure that it's not just that we're connected to broadband, but that we're connected to high-capacity broadband, and that that broadband is scalable. So today, a rural community, and I know in Alaska, it's about a third of all of the libraries are at a 1.5 megabit. And at the same time, they have 7 to 10 public computers, plus people bringing in their tablet or their cell phone, and sometimes both of them. So that's a pretty big draw on the available broadband when you're talking 1.5. And I will say that through the intervention of the BTOP program, the Alaska State Library has been able to connect almost all of their libraries to a 1.5 megabit. And when they were excited about being connected to a 1.5 megabit, I kind of said, well, to be excited about 1.5 is not where we need to be right now. We really need to be talking about something that can scale from there on up. And in talking with some of our rural members, people are bandying with the ConnectEd and with E-rate right now about the gigabit connectivity. And we've been asked quite a bit, so this is what I would talk to the senator about, I think, is in a rural community, do you need a gigabit? And I think that the answer is yes. It may not be that you need it today, or you may not need it in the near term, but I think that all communities are moving towards that for one-to-one K-12 education. So you have everyone has a laptop, or for what they're doing in the school that we heard about this morning, is that we're planning for the future of our students, and we're planning for the future of our workforce. And that we don't want broadband to be the limiting factor in anything that either our kids or our workforce, our seniors, we hear a lot about seniors using the public library to connect with family far away or overseas and things like that. So I would urge policymakers to think about where we envision our communities being rather than where they are today.
Well, obviously, we support E-rate. We also support additional build-out because we are seeing additional demands. And it seems that every time you think you're comfortable with technology, they come up with something new that requires more capacity, higher speed. I mean, speed is good. People like to have the type of quality of programming that you can achieve only with that high speed. I think in terms of workforce, I can't think of too many career areas where high-speed internet isn't an absolute requirement as well. So whether it's applying for a job, I mean, years ago, people filled out paper applications for jobs. Virtually every federal job, you have to go online now. Veterans coming back are used to certain technology, and they're not going to want to go back to a community where they don't have access and ability to communicate with people with that high-speed technology. Healthcare is a field that is so amazingly dependent on technology, all the equipment. We have colleges that are now offering programs for the design and for the maintenance of some of this high-speed technology that's used in hospitals for monitoring patients' blood pressure and meds, et cetera. And so much of it is requiring a very high level of sophistication and technology. And manufacturing. I mean, years ago, we talked about manufacturing standing in a line, and everybody would put the one little widget in the line. It's all now advanced manufacturing. It's robotics, it's lasers, it's high tech. So having the speed and the capacity to be able to use that, not just in an urban area, not just in a suburban area, but in our rural areas where we're becoming increasingly dependent on the technology. He mentioned some of that, the GIS for agriculture, the weather forecasting. I mean, so much of that's dependent on the speed of your internet connections.
So, Dr. Atwater, I'd love to ask you a question. You were talking about kind of, your community and what you're serving. How did you initiate any discussions, or have you had any discussions with those who are your ISPs out there as you kind of work through what your requirements are, your differentiating services between your schools? We're really interested in kind of talking about, what kind of critical conversations are school leaders reaching out to their ISPs to say, this is where we want to take our students. This is kind of what I need from you. How can we find a partnership? And I'm just curious if you did any of that.
Oh, certainly. We're constantly trying to do that, and working with our ISPs is a way to expand what we offer our students. The advantage is that our most remote settings really are pretty untapped in terms of connectivity for the local residents. And so if the ISPs can look at a school as a way to get into a community, they have that advantage. And so currently we're looking at microwave technology for some of our more remote schools as a way to get into those and expand the connectivity there. But yeah, we're constantly working with our ISPs, and they're very receptive to helping us. Obviously, the lack of people in Alaska is really what, from a market perspective, limits us, is that we just simply don't have the masses of people that will buy the connectivity to make the investment come to fruition very quickly. So, but it is a challenge, and we are constantly working to make it better.
So I would pose this to some of you as well. For example, Corey, one of the things, there's thousands of schools across the country, and I'm always amazed when I represent rural broadband providers. So when I'll say, well, are you talking to your school superintendent? Are you having these discussions? Are you seeing any initiative from NEA's perspective to, sit down and talk to the local technology providers?
So yes, the NEA works through our state affiliates, and our state affiliates are in the field and each state talking with their members, their schools, school districts, and via the E-rate, because we champion the E-rate and we encourage our members to pursue applying for the E-rate, especially if they have very high need. The E-rate, it provides discounts to the neediest schools based on level of poverty, which is calculated by the percentage of eligibility and free and reduced lunch. And so we're always, in particular rural areas, in many instances rural areas may be aware of the E-rate, but may not understand exactly how it could benefit them, or may not have. One of the challenges with rural areas is because of you've got very, very small staffs. As you just, you mentioned earlier that sometimes when you go into a senator's office or a member of Congress's office, when you're talking about the E-rate or you're talking about, broadband in schools, do you talk to the education LA or the tech LA or the telecom LA? Like who, in many instances, they're separate. So, marrying and bringing together, the idea that technology and broadband is really a key component to education these days, and raising the level of awareness that that education and pursuit of education. For example, the Common Core, or I'll just say standardized testing is moving to being completely online within the next couple of years. And how are we going to help those schools in completely rural areas? Those are the questions that are coming up through our membership. How are we going to be able to provide? Everyone has wanted access, especially sufficient broadband access because of a variety of reasons that have already been articulated. Distance education, access provides you. It is that equalizer between the haves, or among, I should say, the haves and the have-nots. And so level of access, and not just access, but sufficient access. For example, as Marika identified, in schools, you might have a school room of 12 students, and you might have a high school, a building with 500 students. Think about a one-to-one device environment there, or think about standardized testing, for a week at a time for the entire student population there. How do you ensure that that's possible? And for the rural areas, coming back to thinking about challenges and why I would give my E-rate pitch to Senator Begich, is that it's cost, because it is just more costly. And that makes sense. I'm from rural Iowa. Gasoline costs more, milk costs more, depending on where you are. And so what I would go back to, and I've heard it I heard it from superintendent as well as from Senator Begich. One size does not fit all in this arena. And so we need to be sure as we move forward in thinking about how we modernize the E-rate and think about how we advocate for connecting communities and anchors institutions and ensuring that we have capacity, that we allow for local decision-making, flexibility, that we set goals but not mandates, so that we can allow for that 12-student one-room classroom, and to ensure that we can meet everyone's needs.
Terrific.
And I think in terms of libraries and the awareness of what opportunities are out there with different kinds of providers, we saw a big change in how libraries work with local providers through the BTOP program, and I don't mean to dwell on that, but it's a recent example, and particularly the role of the State Library Agency. And Senator Begich mentioned the broadband council, I can't remember what he called it, but a broadband group bringing people together to talk about the broadband needs in Alaska. And I know that the Alaska State Library is involved in that, and that is a way, I think, for the local providers to hear the needs of community anchors like libraries or schools or hospitals or whomever, and then for the library agency to learn what options are out there, because I think that is a place for growth between so that the provider knows, okay, I need to be able to go in and offer 10 megabits of service to this library or this school or whatever it is, and that I need to also be able to talk to them about the recurring costs. And in Alaska, that's a huge issue, about what your monthly bill is going to be. And in rural areas in general, that the library may want to have 10 megabits or 100 megabits, but the monthly costs are unaffordable given the budgets and particularly recent budget cuts and things like that. So I think bringing the State Library Agency or in a local community, because we're also very supportive of local decision-making, but bringing the library to the table when you're having conversations about what your smart community needs. And so that the library serves everybody in the community from birth to Medicare Part D. So we touch everybody's lives, whether it's through the distance education or through healthcare or K-12, homeschool, all of that kind of thing. And so I think that the library brings a very unique perspective on how to build your smart community.
I'd love to see if anybody in the audience, because again, I know you guys are on a tight schedule, love to see if there's any questions that you have for the panelists here. Yes, Jeff.
This was actually a question for fourth grade teacher in Kenai. And the question that I have, what are the things that you would do if you had unlimited broadband? What kind of innovation would you bring to the classroom?
You know, that's a great question, and it's hard to say what would be out there, what's possible if we had that. It's kind of one of those questions that it's hard to answer just due to the fact that I'd love to know what's out there and what's available. I know that right now I use Skype, and that takes a lot of broadband to do. And I do love the potential of that. If you look up Mystery Skype, that's the next thing I'd like to try, and that is to connect to a school around the world, any school around the world, and the students ask the other class questions about where they live. The goal is to find out where they live, and we don't tell them where we live in the beginning. They have to use mapping skills and Skype the technology to identify that by just asking yes or no questions. And it's a lot of fun. It's engaging for the students, and it's definitely something I'd like to try. Broadband is required for that. And I'd just love to see more interactivity for the students, getting them involved, letting them innovate and create using the broadband technology. That's what I'd love to see.
Who wouldn't want Jason to be your teacher?
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm sorry the senator's not here, but we had a really interesting example that happened in the public library. Both Senator Begich and Lisa Murkowski did a reading to a kindergarten class during the summer reading program, and so they Skyped in. using the library's video conferencing. So libraries across Alaska could have the kids come in and sit down and read, the picture book, and it just like this kind of idea, which I think is on a number of levels. I mean, showing that the senator thinks reading is important for young children, but then also for them to become engaged and start to think about civic, kind of engagement that hopefully will carry on as they grow. So I think those kinds of learning opportunities are just at the beginning stages.
Other question? Yes, please.
It'd be appropriate to answer questions since I'm not on the panel, but I work with community colleges that offer distance learning programs, so I'm a little bit on that edge of this is what you can do sort of thing. But with community colleges especially, broadband is huge in terms of offering those opportunities. Now, to graduate, you have to take a speech class. So the colleges are trying to offer every course that you could possibly imagine online so the students can graduate, all that stuff. And so they have not only Skype, but Skype, I think, also is offering, and there's other learning management systems where you can watch 5 or 6 students all on one screen. The teacher can offer speech class, so that the students can do a speech, whatever, in front of an audience, even though they may be sitting at their house in, remote Alaska somewhere. Simulations, there's a lot of amazing Department of Defense programs in which they're teaching students to, a medical student, as a nurse, you go into a room and, there's the person lying on the floor, and what do you do? And, God forbid if you kill the person, but who really cares because it's just a simulation. But it's that sort of thing in terms of it requires the broadband capacity to if you do this, this is what happens if you do that, and it requires all that computer, I don't know the right words, memory, whatever, to be able to offer all those options. So the colleges are really doing amazing things if you just let them go. Open education resources. There are a lot of this materials available for free, but the students and the teachers won't be able to access it unless they have the broadband. But I could go on, but that's kind of
good commentary. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, we've got a question back there. Thank you. Thank you for being our runner.
My question is not for anybody specifically, but I'm curious, what sort of federal programs, if any, have any of you used to get rural broadband or any sort of internet to the homes, to the libraries, or to the community colleges, or any sort of place? What federal programs have worked? What have not? Have you used any?
So as Corey's been talking about, the E-rate program, I think, is probably the #1 for schools and public libraries. And school libraries benefit because they're part of the K-12 education campus, but really focusing on the public library, as Corey said, it's been a very successful program where in the beginning, in 1998, very few libraries were connected at all, and many on dial-up and that kind of thing. And now we don't talk about connectivity so much, even though there are a few that are unconnected. We're talking about the capacity. So that program is the primary technology program for public libraries and for K-12 as well.
Yeah, so you've hit the nail on the head, actually, when you think about the challenges that we face as representing educators with building out capacity, in some instance connectivity in rural Alaska, but then ensuring capacity building. And the E-rate is the only federal program, and it's overseen by the FCC, the Federal Communication Commission. So it's not appropriated funding. In fact, there is no federally appropriated funding in this realm for education technology, for professional development, for curricular design. There had been a program that was well-liked and well-received among educators called Enhancing Education Through Technology, or the short term is E2T2. And that was, I think, came about in about 2002, was zero funded for FY11. And we have not yet seen reinvestment or a focus in this arena at all through federal funds. So the E-rate is it. which really is why it's so critical. It's critical that that we sustain the program and that we ensure that whatever we do to improve or change the program, it continues to meet the needs of everyone, not one size fits all, and that we invest.
And I will add on the flip side is there is another program within the Universal Service Fund, which is where E-rate resides, which is for the providers. So we represent, for example, 900 small rural community communication providers that get USF high cost, which is, again, not a federal subsidy program. It's an intercarrier pool of revenues that they use to actually build the infrastructure to the schools, to the libraries, to the community colleges that they are serving in their service territory, along with RUS, which is the Department of Agriculture, low interest rate loans that are available to also extend the infrastructure. So you've got both kind of the ISP that is providing the service, and then you've got the end user equipment on all of your ends.
And then
Good
we've
question.
also used several different federal programs allow for professional development. Perkins CTE is one area, for example, that's important because it allows us to do some teacher training in the technology areas, and that's been important. So, I mean, there's smaller pots, but I think it's clear that there's no one big place we can say, here's the big enchilada, here's the big source of funding, and if we could just tap into it, we'd be able to expand as rapidly as we'd like to. There was some money in the stimulus to help build public computing capacity, which was helpful, but it was a one-time shot, so it wasn't enough to really do what all of us wanted to do. It was better than not getting any funding, but it didn't really address the big issue long-term. And so I think the message here is that while we are getting to the point where more and more of our young people have access to some technology, not necessarily at home, but at least at school, and they're hungry for more technology. Our teachers and our superintendents, our college and university professors and faculty and staff are interested in the technology. It still is not ubiquitous. There's still areas of the country that are lacking the kind of capacity they need in order to really be in the 21st century in terms of offering education and job training at a level that we think is going to allow us to take things to the next level in terms of professional development, in terms of the economy in a lot of those poor economic areas. And that's the sad thing. It's about money, because a lot of these areas are impoverished, so they can't sustain the same kind of rates that somebody can in an urban area that has a better family income. And so they're not as attractive as a market. And yet, if they had those funds, if they had that equipment, the kind of productivity they could have, the kind of job opportunities, whether it's entrepreneurship or it's agriculture, or it's other areas, could just be phenomenal, not just for themselves, but for their local communities, for their state, for the national economy in general.
All right. Well, with that, I want to thank our panelists for sharing your thoughts. Thank you, Discovery Education and folks up in Alaska. We greatly appreciate your beaming in with us here today. And thank you all for coming to share your time. Appreciate it.
So we can provide
Can I see us? Great. No.